Hello, welcome back to the channel. I'm Camille and I will be doing part 3 of my Trope Talk series, and this one is purely just me ranting. It's not going to be as helpful as the last video, but that's fine. Sometimes you just need a good rant. We're just going to be going straight into awful tropes that you still see in books and that keep getting perpetuated on Booktok and why I think they're awful. So to get straight into it, this first trope, I think this is not a hot take by any means. I think this take is very ice cold, but I am glad that it is getting more attention, and that is the pregnancy trope. I've seen a lot on Instagram, actually, especially people complaining about this trope, and they're just tired of seeing it, or they've made memes out of it. And that is the trope that typically you see with characters where the book's almost done. Like, we've done just about everything, and then suddenly the female main character wakes up one day and she feels a little queasy, and that's when you know, oh great, we're doing this again. And I think the biggest thing with this is, why are we still doing this? In the year of our Lord and Savior, 2024, why are we still doing this trope? Like, we don't have anything else, anything better that we could be doing with our time, but we're going to throw this in there. It really comes off as a, I don't know how to wrap this story yet type of vibe. And apart from the whole question of why do we still see this trope? What is the point of this trope? I think it is incredibly just lazy writing. Like I said, it feels like we don't know how to properly complete a story, so we just throw that in at the end. And yeah, it is usually at the end. And it usually falls under this whole realm of people are suspecting that they're pregnant before that's actually physically possible. It's always like, oh, 3 days after the female main character has sex with the main character, the male interest, and then she's like, I think I'm pregnant because I threw up this morning. Okay. And that to me shows that this trope really kind of spawns from fan fiction, because sometimes I read this sort of thing and I'm like, a 12-year-old wrote this. Surely someone who knows anything about the female body would take a moment and be like, does that actually make sense? But I also hate this trope because it really leans into the idea that women need to be paired off with someone and they need to be pregnant or have a child in order for their story to be complete. And I think that while this trope is kind of getting rightfully clowned on more, and I think we're seeing a kind of shift away from that, I still find it here and there, and I always find it to be quite lazy, to be honest. It just really feels like a, all right, tie it up in a pretty little package and ship it off, we're good to go. And it really just feels like, no, there's probably something better that we could be doing to conclude this story, rather than we just need to make this character pregnant. And it really slows the plot down. And this isn't to say that you can't include pregnancy in your story at all. You know, to look at the storytelling aspect of all of these tropes, I don't think that you just have to leave that out entirely. I just think it's important to ask, why am I including this in the story, and what is it actually adding to the plot? And you know, if you can't really answer those questions, then maybe you don't need to include it. Don't just put a child in a story just for the sake of having some other storyline that you can go with. That little baby is still a person that needs their own storyline. They need to have some purpose within the plot. Honestly, it's kind of giving family vloggers. Let's be real. I will be first and foremost a family vlogger hater. And it does kind of give this vibe of, we need to add content, so let's have a baby. That's what it's giving. I think I just made a real world connection, and I think that adds credence as to why I hate this trope. Okay, this next trope, I wish I had a better name for it. So if you can think of one in the comments, feel free to tell me. But this is kind of similar to the pregnancy trope in terms of the female main character basically losing all motivation and character after she pairs up with the love interest. Like, she just loses her drive and who she is, like her essence of a character, because now her whole identity is just absorbed into being paired up with some dude, with some guy. I will give romance a free pass because I think a lot of the whole idea of just solely a romance genre is these two characters getting together. So excluding that, I'm just saying, like, in any other type of situation, it is really frustrating to see this character go from someone who has these ambitions and, you know, this huge character arc, but then once they meet up with their love interest and they finally get together, it's kind of like, hmm, blah blah blah. I can't really be bothered to think about this rebel army and defeating this evil empire anymore because all I can think about is getting laid by this dude of a man. And that's it. Like, girl, do something, please. And since we're now on this trend of applying real world applications to it, that sounded redundant, but bear with me. It's that same type of vibe of, you know, everyone has that one friend when they get into a relationship that is their whole personality. That's what this feels like. That's what this is. And that's why I hate this trope so much, because it's like, no, you're still a person. Even if you have a partner or not, you're still a person. You still have your own identity. You still have your own dreams and ambitions. What are you doing? There's nothing that makes me more sad than to see a female main character just after she gets together with some cardboard cutout with a chiseled jaw. Okay, I'm not sure how much of a hot take this next one is, but the fated mates trope can actually go take a hike. I hate I hate that trope. And I feel like it's always kind of been a thing, and it you always kind of see it in the world of fantasy where the love interest is something that's not a human. So yes, I feel like it's been a thing for a hot minute, but I feel like especially recently we're seeing it a lot in this new like fairy type of thing. Like, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think it is 9 times out of 10 just incredibly lazy writing, because it feels like such a loophole to actually do any groundwork to a relationship. Like, it's purely just an immediate click and wow, we're in love, or at least like wow, we have this attraction towards each other that we can't explain, and so we're just going to let that drive the plot rather than putting forth any effort to get to know each other and see if we are actually compatible with each other. And I see this both with the trope where they both parties see that initial click, or even on the flip side, you know, you have like person A knows that they're supposed to be mated with person B, but person B doesn't know it yet. And usually like person A is the non-human person, you know, and so you almost get like kind of, I don't know, I get like a little bit of an ick from that, because it's like, oh, you don't know it yet, but you'll come around that we're fated, that we're mates. If I had to read the word mates in a book, I'm not going to read that book. Not going to do it. Overall, I think I just hate this trope so much because rarely does it ever feel earned. Like, you guys, this is just an excuse for you guys to be horny towards each other and then pass it off that you're in love, which ties into my next trope of the insta love trope, which to me is usually just like insta horniness. Both of them just feel like the epitome of tell, don't show. You know, with writing, so much of it is you need to show your readers. You shouldn't just tell them, blah, blah, blah. Both of these tropes give that of the complete opposite. I am telling you that these two characters are in love, so you need to believe me, but I'm not actually going to show it. And specifically, like with the insta love trope, why I find that one frustrating to read is it's not usually insta love, like it is insta lust, and that's fine, but it's also okay to just have your characters be attracted to each other. Like, if they're horny and they want to bang, let them do that. But don't tell me that they're actually soulmates. It's like, no, you can actually just want to pound one out and then move on with your life. We don't need to be doing all this. We're doing too much when we're now trying to package it as, well, they're actually in love and they're soulmates. I haven't seen that though. I haven't read that though. I've just seen them ferociously banging in every other chapter, but I don't actually believe that they're in love. I don't actually see that they're compatible or that they get along outside of their bed chemistry. It really just makes for such a poorly structured romance at the end of the day. Here's an absolutely frigid take, but the miscommunication trope, I actually think there's a lot of room to have good storytelling if you are working with things like language barriers or cultural differences. Like, that has the makings of something really great and something with like actual substance and depth. That is not the same thing as the miscommunication trope, where it truly just comes down to we're emotionally immature characters and we can't have a conversation for 5 seconds. So instead, we're going to go 300 pages of just dumbness because we just cannot get our shit together for 2 seconds. Anytime I see a miscommunication trope, all I can think is, this writer doesn't actually know how to set up conflict. That's what this is. And I'm looking at you, Iron Flame. Did I read Iron Flame? No. Have I watched extensive deep dives about Iron Flame? Yes. So I know enough of it to be like, so much of that book was purely just back and forth of not having productive conversations. And that just feels so lazy and contrived. Like, rather than having this really brief, maybe it is a hard conversation, but rather than doing that, you're just, my furry sons are fighting and I've lost my train of thought. But I was just saying something along the lines of, oh, rather than having a brief conversation, you're just going to not have your characters hash something out that would probably take a page or two because you can't come up with some other conflict that makes sense. And I might even be able to forgive this trope if I saw a character, like a character flaw of theirs was that they were emotionally immature and very, very bad at communicating. And that was something that they grew out of. Like, that was their character arc. Maybe. I'd give it a maybe. Okay, next trope makes me so wary of reading most fantasy and romantasy these days. And here's the thing, I don't want to hate romantasy. I have no issue with romantasy, and I even have a potential video idea about romantasy, but it's bullshit like this that makes me not want to read it, and that is the misunderstood asshole trope. And when I say this, I always think of, it's the male main character. It's always like the main love interest who fits under this stereotype. I don't have much to say other than I'm so tired of seeing this. I'm so tired of seeing this over and over. And this even kind of falls under the whole like first Trope Talk video I did, where I feel like so many male fantasy romantasy characters feel the same. I wish I had kind of gone into this aspect a little bit more in that video, because I really focused more on the physical aspects and characteristics, but I wish I had touched on like personality wise, because that's what I feel like so much of these men are. They fall under this misunderstood asshole type of deal where, they have like a really tragic backstory that's supposed to justify the way that they are, which is funny because 9 times out of 10, if a female character had a really tragic backstory, she's usually not an asshole. So why are we doing this to the guys? Or you see, this guy's like, he's such a jerk to everyone else except for the female main character, and it's like, if he's only nice to one person, like, that's not it. That's not it. And I know it's supposed to be playing off this, like, that just means she's so extra special because he's actually a terrible human to everyone else except for Susie so and so. It's like, okay, that just means he's not a very well written character. If he is ew, yucky trash to everyone else except for this one special, I don't want it. Like that is just not a very well written character. Like, why is he that way? Because it really feels like that is just trying to pander towards the readers rather than taking the time to flesh out this character and give him any sort of depth besides, oh, he's really gruff and he's actually really controlling, but he's very sexy. And that's the other thing about this trope. Take any negative aspect about a dude and then just add but at the end, and that is this character. You know, like, oh, he's actually really controlling and he doesn't like it when I talk to the other male characters, but dot dot dot. Oh, he actually says really awful shitty things to other female characters and slut shames them, but he's like really sexy and great in bed when it comes to me. And he's also very like vague and mysterious, so it's fine. I just feel like I'm at the point where so many of these male characters feel so similar. I look at this trope and I can't help but wonder, are writers just seeing that it worked for authors ABC, so they just rehashed the same dude? And I think physically, like looking at the way their characters are described, going back to my first trope talk video, yes, that is my theory. Looks wise, yes. Personality wise, I also think yes. But at what point are we just tired of seeing slight variations of an actually objectively poopy man? And not just that, but it's like this man is a load of crap, but we're supposed to be okay with it and justify it because we know he's the love interest. But if this same person had the same characteristics, did the same things, and they weren't the love interest, that's not how they were written, they would be seen as a not very good person. And I hate that double standard. Okay, this next trope, I wanted to kind of break into two different parts because I think the first part, there's been good improvement on, hopefully. And then I think the second part is just kind of like a branch off to that. So, first part is being the not like other girls trope. I know, hot take over here. And then the second part is the lack of good female friendships. Like I said, I do think there has been improvement with this first trope. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we call things out and we've been having these conversations for years and years. I do think that there has been an improvement when you look back and compare it to books from like the early 2000s, the 2010s, that sort of thing. I think we have gotten better, especially because we're seeing so many fantasy books with female characters as the main character, and even with like the rise of romantasy being its own subgenre, I think that has also had something to do with this. But that being said, like, you do still see it pop up, and I think this trope is a good example of why I think these types of conversations are important to have. Like, if you see it, you call it out, because then we can see it and do better and learn and grow from that, so that we're not falling back into this pit hole of a really poorly written female character. But I will say, I always think that there's room for improvement when it comes to showcasing really good, substantial female friendships in stories. I do kind of feel like there's still this lack of friendships that don't revolve around men, and not even just friendships, but also just like an innate sense of sisterhood in books. You know, it's like, sure, you might have a female main character, as your protagonist, and there might be other female characters, but are they actually friends with each other, or are they kind of isolated and dispersed throughout the story, and there's really no sense of sisterhood because of that? I'll try to remember to add this video to the description, but there was a video I watched. I can't remember who the creator was, but she did a great breakdown of the Harry Potter series, and she listed like all of the male, like named male characters in the series and all the female characters, and the difference is astounding. There's like less than 30 female characters in 7 books. Like, this is a huge series, and that's what we're working with. And not even just that, but she breaks down their interactions, like how they interact with each other, and it is very kind of like isolating. Like, just think like Hermione, for example. You know, she has Harry and she has Ron, but she doesn't really have like good female friends. And even like with other girls like Jenny or even Luna, it's like they all kind of orbit around Harry, which like you can make the argument, I'm like, yeah, but he's the main character, and it's like, yes, but you can also have a male main character and still showcase that these are these women are actually people themselves, you know? And it's even more atrocious when you do have a female character as your protagonist and she is isolated from other female characters. They don't even have to be female characters like her own age, like even including like other women of various ages, like that sort of thing. I think why this trope, and like maybe it's just a me thing that I struggle with, but I look at this trope and I just think about like my own personal life and how it just feels really unrealistic to read these books when I look and see like, no, I have so many wonderful female friendships that mean so much to me. Friendships that I've had for years and years that make up, they're part of who I am. They make up part of my identity. And who I am today is because of these like great friendships and relationships that I have. That sense of sisterhood is really important. And I still think that there's like this lack of that in a more kind of mainstream type of sphere. Okay, this next trope is going to be a little more on the serious side, so apologies for that, but that is the bury your gaze trope. I think this trope is pretty self-explanatory as to why it's not a very popular trope. There are so many well-done videos that have been done on this type of trope. If you're not all too familiar with it and want a more of a deep dive, I'd recommend go looking at that. Just really brief overview is basically just seeing like queer characters in a story being treated as expendable. And these are typically like secondary characters. I don't think this trope works all too well when they're main characters, but you still see it. But it mostly comes across with secondary characters who are queer and they're just very expendable. They rarely have a happy ending. Something tragic always befalls them. Some really brief examples would be like Castiel and Charlie from Supernatural, and even like main characters to kind of level the playing field. Like, think of Killing Eve. Sorry for spoilers, that show ended like 2 years ago. But just think of like the two main characters. That is also an example of this trope where they, at the very, very end of the show, they get together and then tragedy befalls them, and that's how the show ends. Like, all of this time waiting for build up, and then they just like nothing comes of it. And this has been a trope that has been discussed and criticized for years. You still see it pop up, but it is still very frustrating. So frustrating to see. It's not just this idea of like, well, if you have a queer character, like they have to be happy. You can't ever kill one off again. That's not what I'm saying. I need us to put our critical thinking hats on for a second. I'm saying it in the sense of, what is the intention for putting these characters through these types of tragic things? And typically it is quite literal in the sense that they kill off these characters. Or if it's a queer couple, one of them dies, if not both of them dies. I think this trope hits different because as someone who is a part of that community, it feels like it hits closer to home. It feels like a lot of times writers want to have their cake and they want to eat it too. You know, they want to have their representation brownie points, but they don't want to do anything more substantial with their queer characters after that. So you can always kill them off. Like it's always like that kind of idea. And it just kind of feels like, you know, these characters puts them in this box of like they're only valid if they're suffering. Like sure, we'll include a queer character, but we don't want to see them happy at the end of the day. They can stay here. They can be included, but they're not going to be happy about it. We need to put them in this little box so that I can move on with the story that I want to tell while still getting my pandering brownie points. And it is very just like, you know, it's complicated. It has layers. Like there is a good way you can go about showing like tragic things that happen to these characters that happen to be queer. It is one of those things that if you are writing a story and you have diverse characters in it, it's always good to stop and ask yourself, like, what are my plans with this character? And if they are tragic plans that may or may not include death at the end of the day, maybe stop and ask yourself, why am I doing this? What purpose does this serve for the plot? Just something to consider. I don't want to end on a super serious note, so I'll just do one more trope, and that is the teeny, 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 ittle, bittle, whittle, teeny, whittle lady character, and her love interest is the biggest dude to ever dude in the existence of dudes. And I think we can all agree that Allie Hazelwood is offender number one when it comes to this trope. I think if anything, this trope to me is silly. It's so silly. And maybe I'm just too old now where I'm like, oh, this big man is so big and he can just cradle me in his arms and crush me with his thumb and index finger. I'm like, maybe. I think what makes this trope so silly is that it still leans into that idea of like, we're seeing the same characters. They all look the same. Not every man needs to be 10 feet tall with muscles ripping through his cotton blend shirt. And not every woman needs to be the tiniest woman who eats an almond a day. Actually, no. This falls under... See, okay, here's the thing. I also feel like... now you got me monologuing. I feel like this trope is always like, he was so muscly, muscle bound, and because he works out and does all these things, and then the teeny tiny lady character, she's always written as like, she's just that, she just happens to be teeny tiny. Like she eats 10,000 calories a day and has cheeseburgers for breakfast, but don't worry, she's still teeny tiny. And it's like, who are you writing this for? Because that gives the energy of like men writing a woman character. They think that that is like the pinnacle of attraction and attractiveness, is this very petite woman who is still like one of the guys, but don't worry, she still fits within this box of what is like socially acceptable in terms of attractiveness. And I've said it before and I will say it again. It's okay to have diversity in what your characters look like. Not every man needs to be a bodybuilder, and not every female character needs to be this teeny tiny, she'll blow away in the wind type of thing. I think like other tropes on this list, it kind of feels like, well, it worked for these authors, so I'm just going to stick with that formula and call it a day. But then what point do you wake up one day and realize, oh, all these characters, they are described the same. you know, like I can't even tell the difference in what I'm reading. And I think that's the whole thing with this rant is you just kind of get to a point where you're like, I feel like I'm just reading the same book over and over again. Or at the very least, I feel like I am reading the same characters over and over again. And golly, that just gets so tiring. But I'm going to call it there. If there are any other tropes that you really hate and you want to rant about them in the comments, feel free to pop off. I'd love to hear it. I'm sure that there are ones that I have not even mentioned. Like, I know that there are more. I just didn't get to them. I didn't want this video to be 3 hours long. But just remember, please be kind in the comments. People are allowed to have their opinions. I share my silly opinions all the time. If you want to join our Discord server, just leave us a comment expressing interest, and Lars or myself will try to reach out to you and get that squared away. If you want to kind of follow more of what we're doing, I've added Lars's works in the description box, links to all of his stuff, and then I've also linked my Storygraph and Goodreads. I think that's it. I'm going to go feed my cats before they stage a mutiny. Bye, Mom!